Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today we're going to be doing another opinion video, and this is going to be one that shouldn't be that controversial, but kinda is, and that is the fact that the UFL should fire Houston Roughnecks head coach Curtis Johnson. Look, this shouldn't be considered a hot take or an opinion whatsoever, it should be just viewed as a statement. But for some weird reason, after the 2025 season, not only did I see people suggest that he wouldn't get fired, which yes, you could make that argument, but I've been seeing people say that he shouldn't be fired. Do they watch the Roughnecks play football the last 2 years and 3 years when you count the Gamblers? Because this team, under Curtis Johnson, hasn't been that good. The records that were good were inflated, and I'll talk about that, as in this video I'm going to be going over exactly why Curtis Johnson has been such a bad head coach in the UFL, and even back to the USFL to a lesser extent, and why he should be fired. But before we get into that, we need to look at Kevin Sumlin with the 2022 Gamblers. This is the team that Curtis Johnson ended up taking over. Yes, a lot of UFL fans didn't watch both years of the USFL, might not even know Kevin Sumlin coached in the USFL. But Kevin Sumlin was the coach of the 2022 Gamblers, and he took that team to 3-7. Now this 3-7 team, you could argue, was the most impressive in their league team that the Gamblers have had. Because again, the Roughnecks we have now are not the Houston Roughnecks XFL as much as the league can try to put in them as. They are the Gamblers. So the 4 years the Gamblers have existed, this was arguably still their best overall team. The reason is their halftime record, I believe, was 9-1. Heading into halftime, this team just had lead after lead after lead. They were a notoriously bad second half team. They were basically like the Renegades before the Renegades started choking all those games in the UFL. That was this team. This team had lead after lead and were blowing it. They had what I would still argue is the single greatest season in this Ultramodern era of spring football history with Chris Odom's 2022 USFL season, where he just had a stupid amount of blocked kicks, sacks, TFLs, and all that. This defense was incredible. The offense was good enough, but this was the best defense that this team would, well, pretty much have. And yes, they finished 3-7. It was a failure. They had the 7 straight losses. They did beat the Birmingham Stallions back when they were undefeated 8-0. It's one of the most famous underdog victories in spring football history. That team beating them off that end game pick or interception from Jamar. It was insane. But when you look at those games, it's just so many one-score losses because they were blowing leads in the second half. When you look at their point differential, they went 3-7. And only had a negative 12-point differential. I mean, we've seen teams with winning records, whether it be the NFL, college, or spring football, that had legit winning records, not just like, oh, they were 6-4, but we've seen teams that are like 7-3 in the UFL, or something like, let's just say back when, it was a 16-game season, you have like a 10-6 NFL team that had a negative point differential. They were at negative 12, despite being 3-7. And hell, 10 of those came against the Bandits in Week 8. That being the one game they really didn't play well at. So this is the team that Curtis Johnson ended up taking over. Now, he took over the team for 2023, and they actually improved the record to 5-5. But the team itself, they finished with a negative 13-point differential. So, despite winning 2 more games, they actually finished with a worse point differential, which I think is hilarious. That despite having a better record by 2 games, they actually were a worse team from a point differential standpoint. And that is kind of proven in the Week 1 game against the Panthers. Right, the Panthers that season obviously started 2-0, and then they had to win out basically at the end of the year and all that. But the 2023 season was a very interesting one. It is still probably the most intriguing and overall best season of spring football we've seen. There's a good argument for that. The entire North Division just basically collapsed and ended up being this essentially 4-way tie in a lot of ways in Week 10, where it was legit win and in for both matchups. And the South ended up having every single team finish 500 and better. But the Gamblers had a shot to make the playoffs. Heading into Week 9, they controlled their own destiny, not just for a playoff berth, but for the number 1 seed in the South Division. Yes, when you look at the final records being 8-2 and 5-5, you think there's no way they could have. If they went out, they finished 7-3. If they went out, they finished 4-2 in their division. If they went out, the Stallions moved to 7-3. They go to 3-3 in the division, and then you also have the Gamblers having swept them, so they would have beaten them in tiebreaker. If they won out, they would have been the number 1 seed. Instead, they got obliterated by Birmingham in Week 9, and then lost a not really meaningless Week 10 game, but pretty meaningless. Like that Week 10 game, it was a lot like the Dragons Battlehawks scenario, where in Week 10 it was virtually impossible for the Battlehawks to make the playoffs. Basically the same way here, right? The Gamblers would have had to win by like some stupid margin, and it just wasn't going to happen. And again, a lot of that is because when they were winning, they weren't impressive. The Generals that season were not a great football team. Yes, they were great in 2022. They weren't that season. They only won 16-10. The win against the Maulers was pretty impressive, considering at that point the Maulers were looking better. But that Maulers team, right, they were a lot of defense and then an offensive ground game that, as we joked about, you had Modulina and Garrett Groshek, who just weren't doing what they were supposed to at the ground game. So, yeah. They went 3-1 against the North. In the South, they went 2-4. And obviously, they couldn't even sweep the Showboats that year. Now, yes, the Cole Kelly, Todd Haley Showboats, legendary team. Somehow the best Showboats team record we've seen across the 3 seasons, 4 if you count Bandits. So, that was this season. But the important thing is that guy in the bottom of your screen, that Mark Thompson fellow, he put up what is the best season a running back, pure running back, has put up in ultramodern spring football. Look, no disrespect to Abram Smith. Purely from what they did in their season on the ground, Mark Thompson had the best season in the ultramodern era of spring football. Period. 4.8 yards per rush with 14 rushing touchdowns in 8 games played is an absurd stat. If he plays in 10 games, he's putting up over 800 yards, because again, he was averaging 81 per game, so that's 160. So he's putting up over 800 yards, and he's putting up probably about 17-ish touchdowns in a 10-game season. That's what he would have done. He fumbled one time, didn't even lose it. So when you look at it, the fact that he didn't even have one of those big rushes, as I've talked about before, your longest rush is a stat that really isn't good at actually looking at your average, because if you have like a 70-yard rush, it's going to inflate your average even for the season. His long was 33. So he had a legit 4.8 average. This isn't he had an 80-yard rush, so his stat is inflated by like 0.5. He did that. So you had that ultra carry job on offense with Mark Thompson, and then you had Kenji Barr at quarterback. Barr wasn't great. He wasn't awful, but 8 TDs to 9 interceptions passing, taking 19 sacks, isn't that good. And he was the main quarterback for this season. He wasn't the only guy, but he was the main one. He wasn't all that great. He was just kind of okay. So that was your team. And your defense wasn't as threatening as it was in 2022, yet you still finished 5-5 because you had a North Division that just imploded on itself for half of the season, and you had Mark Thompson pull off an absurd carry job, scoring 14 touchdowns in 8 games, and it really was like 17. One of those games you didn't really play too much. That's insane. So, yes, record-wise, improved. Actual team, not as good as the year before. Just straight up. And that's not even saying the whole talent split. As you all know, the 2022 UFL talent was better than pretty much either 2023 season, because obviously 2 seasons, 2 leagues versus 1. Purely from how good the team was in their respective league, this team, despite finishing with a better record, was not as good a team as the 2022 team under Kevin Sumlin. So, let's move on to the 2024 UFL season. 1-9, only win against the Renegades in an infamous Week 4 game where Curtis Johnson said they had the best offense in the league. That best offense in the league put up 20 points or more 3 times. That's it. And 2 of them were the last 3 games of the season. Finished 1-9. The Memphis Showboats that season would have had a legit argument for the worst team in spring football history. Spring football history. I'm including any spring league. If it wasn't for the Roughnecks. They somehow beat the Roughnecks at the beginning and end of the season. That Roughnecks team lost to a team that was a colossal failure, colossal disappointment, but somehow beat them twice. So, outright failure for the Roughnecks. And yes, they won in Week 4 against the Renegades to avoid being 0-10. But when you look at this team, you'll start to notice another really bad trend with Curtis Johnson, who, mind you, is an offensive-minded guy. This is a guy who has only been an offensive guy, wide receivers assistant, wide receivers coach, offensive assistant, offensive analyst, offensive guy. His 3 quarterbacks. When you look at the stats, and obviously rushing-wise, Nolan Henderson did pretty well, you would imagine that Nolan Henderson was the best quarterback of the 3, which he was. So, in theory, he would have been the day 1 starter and got hurt, right? No. Was he the backup? No. He was the 3rd stringer. Remember that for a couple minutes later. He was the third string quarterback. Jarrett Garantano was the starter. As I have joked about before, he had negative hype. People were outright hating on him before he even played a single snap. And he somehow lived down to the expectations. But because he didn't really throw interceptions, his passer rating wasn't awful. But if you watched him, you know he wasn't good this year or that year. Reed Sinnett was better, wasn't good. And more importantly, wasn't really an upgrade over Kenji Bahar, which was the most egregious part of this whole thing. He wasn't really better than him. Like, he was similar, but he wasn't outright better than him. Because, again, this is a team where we really saw Justin Hall become that guy at receiver. And you had a solid receiving core. But then you have the ground game. The ground game was just pitiful this season. TJ Pledger, Mark Thompson. Thompson had an injury. Took a lot longer for him to come back. Didn't really play that many games. Fumbled a lot. TJ Pledger played. Didn't fumble, but he didn't really do great. 3.3 and 3.4 yards per carries are horrific numbers. And especially rushing touchdown. The fact that Thompson had 5 of them, yet Pledger had none, is rough. And more importantly, no one else had 50-plus yards. Those 3 guys are the only guys that had 50-plus yards on the ground. Henderson at quarterback, Thompson and Pledger. And judging by how little Henderson played, it's safe to say that if Henderson plays the whole season, he's leading this team in rushing by a wide margin. That just shows how pitiful the ground game was. Remember, this is an offensive-minded head coach. So this is what he did in 2024. At this moment, a ton of you wanted him fired. The fact is, the Gamblers Roughnecks changed one of the dumbest decisions ever. Because of the fact that the USFL had a players association and proved why it's a good thing to have that, they were able to get a 14 to stay. And instead of doing what at that moment would have been the right call and keeping them as the Gamblers, they decided to piss off both fan bases by changing them to the Roughnecks. And then acted like it's the Roughnecks' history to piss off both fan bases even more. And then you went 1-9. So Houston fans didn't want him. UFL fans didn't want him. The only people that really wanted him were people that just loved the fact they were getting essentially 2 free wins in the USFL conference. And even then, because those people want the league to survive, they wanted him gone. And instead he came back, but with 2 big asterisks. Number 1 is the GM swap, and number 2 is the only new addition to the coaching staff. Now, coaching staff one is the lesser of the 2, so we'll talk about that first, and that's Tom Cable. Tom Cable became the run game coordinator. He'd done a ton of stuff on offense for a bunch of teams, including like a Super Bowl victory and all that. So he's done a lot. He was added to be that run game coordinator, so that's a pretty big deal that we'll talk about in a second. But the major one was swapping Lionel Valatal for Will Lewis. Will Lewis ended up taking over at GM, and he completely obliterated that roster. He tactical nuked it. It was roughly 2 or 3 players from 2024 that actually were back on the opening day roster for the 2025 Roughnecks. He just slashed that whole roster. He looked at it, said it wasn't good, it wasn't going to win games, and basically overhauled the entire thing. You had Justin Hall and like 2 other guys that stayed. That was it. So when you look at how this team did in 2025, remember that the entire roster got overhauled by the new GM. And well, the team went 5-5 again, with a major asterisk at the end of the season being that they really finished 3-5. That's really the real record you can say they finished as, because against both DC and Michigan, those 2 teams had already clinched playoff spots and were playing backups. Especially Michigan were both playing backups, mainly the quarterback position, obviously. And even then, they weren't like wins. They were close, tight games. So it's not like they went in there and dominated 33 to, 15, where you can say, you know what, even if they played their starters, they probably would have won that day. No, they won 24-21 and 19-12. And even that one, there was some real shenanigans with Michigan that made the game close. So they barely beat up backups to finish 5-5. Still finished 5-5. So got to give them credit for that. And a lot of that was because of Jalen McClendon, who has been the best quarterback they've had since Kenji Bahar, and pretty much the best quarterback they've had since Clayton Thorson, and arguably the best ever. Now, you would imagine that he would be the starter. The GM traded for him. No. He was backup, right? No. For the second consecutive year, the best quarterback on the Houston Roughnecks was the 3rd string quarterback, proving that Curtis Johnson has no idea how to evaluate quarterback talent at this level. Fool me once, right? Shame on me. Fool me. You know what I'm saying. Point is, it's insane that he had his best quarterback be his third stringer not once, but twice in a row. That is egregious, especially considering the GM traded for him. The GM also pulled off, while it didn't end up aging insane because he didn't do a ton, pulled off an insane trade where they were able to get Marcus Sims for an O-lineman they weren't even playing. Though, again, you can blame it on injuries, but you can also blame it on Curtis Johnson. The fact that Sims never really did that much for the team despite being a wide receiver and him being a wide receiver coach. Then the run game. Run game got better. Zaquandre White had a really solid season, never fumbled. Lorenzo Lingard, solid season, never fumbled. Both averaged over 4 yards a carry, 6 touchdowns together. Really solid. And they had not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 other players that had 50-plus rushing yards. So what does that show? It shows that the run game with Tom Cable improved. So Tom Cable improved his part of the ball, or his specific part of the team, whereas the rest of the team, not really. The Week 2 loss against the Renegades. The Renegades played like trash, and they somehow still lost at 11-9. Week 4, they could have won that game. Jalen McClellan did what he could, didn't get the W. The Showboats barely eked that one out with a win both times. Again, the Showboats were bad this season. Like, look, we talk about the Brahmas because the Brahmas were historically bad, but the Showboats sucked once again. And the Roughnecks barely beat them twice. When you look at those 2 games, they combined to win with a +2 point differential. Literally by 1 point in both games. When you compare that to the year prior in those 2 games, they lost by 6 in Week 1 and 7 in Week 2. So point differential-wise for both seasons, they still got crushed. I mean, it's egregious. The Showboats sucked both seasons of the UFL. They finished 2-8 both seasons, though one of them was beating the Roughnecks twice, and even then, their point differential still trumped the Roughnecks in head-to-head. That's embarrassing. And again, after Week 6, who controlled their own destiny? The Roughnecks. Who controlled their own destiny for the number 1 seed in their conference? The Roughnecks. Under Curtis Johnson, after Week 6, they controlled their own destiny. The craziest part is they didn't even have to win out. After Week 6, they had to go 3-1 with the loss being against the Defenders. If they do that, they get the 1 seed. Because if they do that, they then finish at 6-4. They bump the Panthers down to 5-5. They bump the Stallions down to 6-4 with them. Then again, divisional record stuff happens. They end up beating out Birmingham, and they get the 1 seed. Instead, what happened? Just like in 2023, the first game that matters to make the playoffs, they lose. Now, it was closer. It was 33-25. But then in Week 8, when they still had a chance because they got lucky, they had a backup. This wasn't like 2023 where it was like, oh, damn, you lost. Now you basically are screwed. You had another shot at making it. You just had to beat Michigan twice. And you couldn't. You beat them when they played the backups. You lost to them when they played their starters. And you got beat pretty bad in that game. And I'm pretty sure that was also the game where Perkins didn't even play for most of it because he got hurt or something. Yeah. This is the guy that Roughnecks fans think is a head coach for him? Look, overall, when you look at the Curtis Johnson thing, his records have been insanely inflated considering how good this team is. Like, when you look at the Renegades are a team that have choked a lot of games, and a lot of it does fall on coaching. That's why I've been so hard on Bob Stoops over the past couple of years, because the fact that in back-to-back seasons they've been so bad at closing out games is embarrassing, but at least he got them to a championship. With Curtis Johnson, the Roughnecks, again, I still don't think, relative to their specific league, they have not had a team better than the 2022 Gamblers. They just haven't. Like, the more I look back on that 2022 team, that 2022 team may not have had a running back or an offense that had the carry job Mark Thompson, but Chris Odom on defense was insane. Clayton Thorson is probably a lot better than you remember him being. He wasn't great, but he was better than you remember him being. And at this point, is probably their second best quarterback they've had, right? Again, as much as the UFL wants to say, the Roughnecks history, this Roughnecks team history goes back to the Gamblers. So from those 4 seasons, it is tough to say they have had any quarterback better than Clayton Thorson aside from McClendon and maybe Henderson. And the only reason that's a tough one to call is because Henderson really hasn't gotten to play that much, but what we've seen, he has looked solid, but still not great. And even McClendon, the most important thing to remember is that while a lot of us would say that at worst McClendon was the 4th best quarterback this past season, depending on if you put him above Jamar and put him at third. That wasn't really that high a bar this season. The 2025 UFL season was pretty notorious for just weak quarterback play overall. Once you got past Perkins, and even Te'amu really wasn't that good during the regular season because a lot of his numbers were inflated because of just how they played. You basically had one really great quarterback in Perkins. You had an incredible postseason performance by Te'amu, but for the season, your second best quarterback was probably Jamar, then Te'amu if you're talking about pure quarterback, and then Jalen McClendon. He wasn't insane. He was good, and especially considering the Roughnecks benchmark, it's a big deal. Like, he wasn't as bad as Jared Garantano, who once again played and once again proved he wasn't that good, which once again proves that Curtis Johnson wasn't good at evaluating quarterback talent, because Anthony Brown was a day one starter, and he's arguably the worst quarterback this ultra-modern era of spring football has seen. He played multiple games and looked horrid in all of them. So when you look at it, it's hard to justify why you keep Curtis Johnson. I know everybody jokes about the fact that, Moose really likes him. But if we're going to be honest, he's not great at this level, and he hasn't proven it. The record being improved to 5-5 falls on Will Lewis more than it does Curtis Johnson. He overhauled the roster. He made the call to just tactical nuke it. This wasn't a Curtis Johnson call. Look, I know some people like to, talk about how much impact the GM have. As soon as he became GM, he slashed that roster. He's the one who was making trade, to get McClendon, and ended up working. Could you imagine if they didn't have McClendon? This team probably finishes at maybe they finish 3-7, and they only finished that because they win one of the week 9 or 10 games. They beat the Showboats once, and then they pull off one other win. I don't see this team really doing, that great next year if Curtis Johnson's still the head coach. Even to have McClendon, because I wouldn't be shocked if he would do something stupid and put somebody else to start because they looked good in training camp, and then that starter ends up looking bad, and then McClendon comes in and looks good, and it makes him look even worse. And again, we've seen it. We're getting rid of a coach has been a good decision most of the time. The Brahmas, once they got rid of Hines Ward, there were people who actually started defending Hines Ward for some reason. And then guess what? Wade Phillips came in, immediate championship contender. Jeff Fisher did bad with the Panthers. Again, it's hard to say they're fired like Obama. We're going to say fired for the sake of saying it. Fired. Mike Nolan came in, immediately made him a playoff team, immediately had him as a winning team, immediately had him in the championship game 2 years later. Improvement every year. The Maulers had a bad coach in Kirby Wilson, got rid of him, got Ray Horton, immediately made the championship game. It's not a coincidence that most of the time when we're seeing coaches get changed, they're better. Now, this specific season was really awkward because a lot of coaching changes weren't normal, right? The Showboats, it still sucks, so you really can't say it was a bad decision, but if they had Ken Wisenhunt as the coach for the whole season, and he's healthy, they probably finished 3-7 or maybe 4-6, and they're an improvement over the John DeFilippo team, right? John DeFilippo, Larry Fedora did a great job in 2022, got rid of him, added in DeFilippo, made some roster moves, and ended up being better than they were in 2022. So the fact that so far, again, trends do break, but the trend so far is once you get rid of a coach into a traditional, hire, it's an upgrade. There hasn't really been a true downgrade that is normal. A normal hire, so not the whole Peyton party slipping in for Wade because Wade is gone or Ken Wisenhunt kind of thing. Traditional hiring process has been upgrade. But we'll have to wait and see if it ends up happening again because, again, Curtis Johnson so far has been the one that I would say wasn't that. I'd say he was a downgrade from Kevin Sumlin, but I don't know. Again, this is my opinion video. I know this isn't the most divisive topic, but I kind of figured that I needed to make this because I've been seeing people defend Curtis Johnson as being like a good head coach for this level and like, oh, he should keep his job. When, as shown in this video, he really hasn't done a good job with his team. He just hasn't. Comparing it to the other coaches, it's pretty wild to think that. A big part of it is, getting... Like, the fact that Tom Cable came in, immediately did better, and had that infamous moment where he's, coaching Curtis Johnson. Tom Cable should be the head coach of this team, but we'll have to wait and see. Overall, though, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. I don't know when this video is being posted. It might be posted, because this video might be posted, about a week before it posts, or it's, a day before it posts. I don't know. It depends what ends up happening with the Cowboys on Thursday. But as always, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Think about becoming a community member for as low as 99 cents a month. You get an exclusive video every month, team emojis, and other benefits. And as always, guys, have a great night.